and welcome again. I hope wherever you're watching, whether it be India, Pakistan, New Zealand, any other part of the world, that you're very safe. We're nearing the end of the third week of lockdown here in New Zealand. Welcome to my home, where I have been throughout that whole time. This is the 8th webinar that I've done. Over the last 7 webinars, we've looked at all of the different essay types for writing task 2. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at some templates that hopefully you can learn and use in writing task 2 on your test. So again, if it's the first time you're watching, my name is Greg. I've been an English teacher for 15 years now. Most of that time I spent in South Korea. In South Korea, I spent most of that time at a university, so very familiar with academic English and obviously the IELTS test. Some of you may have seen my videos. There's actually going to be a couple of references to those videos in today's webinar. So you may see me holding these. These are the all-important band descriptors. Now, hopefully, people that have watched the webinar before, you've found these online and you've printed out a soft copy, or you have a digital copy on your device that you can follow. If you don't, I want to give you a chance to grab or download these band descriptors now. If you don't do that, it's okay, because I will read out the important parts of the band descriptors. But what I want to make really clear is that when you're studying for the IELTS writing task 2, these band descriptors, I say all important, they are all important, because the better you understand these band descriptors and the requirements of the test, hopefully the better you'll do, and the closer you'll get to achieving your goal. So again, what we're going to do today is we're going to look at 5 different templates that you can use for the different task types. At any stage, feel free to jump onto the Facebook page, ask me a question directly. Otherwise, I'm going to go through and think about it like this. I'm going to give you, well, I'm going to give you some insight into how I would answer each of the different questions. Now, 4 of these questions I've covered on previous webinars. I'm going to use a different example for the problem solution essay, just because it fits the template better and it's a better example to use. So hopefully by now you know all the different task types. So let's put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the board. The first one we looked at, if you remember, agree, disagree. Two views, your opinion. Then advantages, disadvantages. You've already heard me talk about problem solution. And 2 questions. So these are the 5 different templates, the 5 different essay types that I'm going to cover today. This one here, this is the one that I'm going to use a different example for. Otherwise, the essay example will be the same that I used in previous webinars. Now, you're going to see me putting up questions, taking down paper. The questions won't be on the whiteboard the whole time. So hopefully you'll be able to find them on the Facebook page. So they'll be updated, hopefully, so that they're nice and fresh, so that you can follow easily at home. Otherwise, write a message if you want me to put them back up for your review. But let's get straight into it. What we're going to do first is start off with the agree, disagree. So I'm going to put the question up on the board, give you a chance to review that. Okay, if you do need more reading time, please send me a message. Otherwise, I'll give you another chance to read over this again. Then I'm going to introduce the first template. Okay, if you watched the first webinar, which was 3 weeks or so ago, you hopefully can remember this question. What I'm going to introduce to you now is a template, a nice way of answering writing task 2 for an agree, disagree. All right, so it says right here, to what extent do you agree with this view? So a template for an agree, disagree essay type. Okay, so we can see here P1, P2, P3. Hopefully by now, if you've been watching, you can remember what I mean by the 3 Ps. So it's paraphrase, state your position, then preview the main points. Now, during this webinar, I'm going to imagine that I'm answering this question myself in the test. So you're going to see me brainstorming some different ideas. But the first thing I would do is I would paraphrase, right? So I'm going to put the question back up. Let's do some paraphrasing together. Now, why do we paraphrase? Well, this is our chance, according to the band descriptors, to show that we have a wide range of vocabulary and a wide range of grammar. So we're going to take the statement, right? So this is the statement that we're given by the examiner. We're going to take this statement and rewrite it into our own words, right? So now, again, for those that have been watching, there's a way that, well, there's a certain phrase that I use to paraphrase some people. And again, this is where the more of these sort of set phrases you can remember and you can store in your own data bank of knowledge, or your database of knowledge, that'll make it faster in the test. So if you remember, certain individuals, well done, right? So the next thing we're going to do, this is a verb of thinking and saying, and this is where I think you should memorize as many different ways of saying believe, right? So again, some people believe that. These are very common phrases that you get given in these statements from the examiner. Now, I'm just going to use a simple word, think. All right, but I could also say argue. If you want more, I could also say contend. Now, these are good words to memorize because you might be able to use them in other parts of your essay as well. So let's just stay with think. Now, looking ahead to the next webinar on Tuesday, we're going to have a grammar focus, and that first grammar focus is going to be complex sentences. That is a relative pronoun. Keep them in your writing because it highlights to the examiner that you have a complex sentence. And as you've heard me say many times, complex sentences are an important part of the band descriptors. So certain individuals think that. Now, what we have here, we have a conjunction and. So I'm going to treat this as 2 parts, right? So the first part I'm going to focus on is this. Now, here is a little trick, and I will also look at passive voice in one of the grammar focuses in the upcoming webinars. But think about it this way. The government spends too much money on the arts. At the moment, this is an active voice sentence. Who spends money? The government spends the money. I'm going to take money. I'm going to use a synonym for money. Too many funds, right? So funds is a nice way of paraphrasing money. Too much money. Now, spends, here's one for you. Allocated on the arts. Now, the reason I'm not using a synonym for the arts is because off the top of my head, I can't think of one. And I'm trying to replicate an exam situation. So, I mean, if you can think of a nice synonym for the arts, then please send a message through. Otherwise, I'm just going to stay with the arts. But again, we're asked to demonstrate a wide range of vocabulary. So what I can do is I can give some examples and just show the examiner that I know what the arts are, such as, then I'm just going to think of 3 examples. Statues, cultural performances, let's think of one more. What about ballet? Now, these could be any 3, right? So doesn't matter, but I'm just giving 3 examples. Instead of using a synonym, I'm just going to add some more vocabulary in. Who by? Right, so what we're doing now is the government is no longer the subject. We're going to make the government the agent, but I'm not going to use the word government. And if you can think of a synonym for the government that begins with S, please feel free to tell me. Otherwise, if you remember from previous webinars, the state, right? So I'm going to keep the same conjunction with my paraphrasing. Then I move on to the second part, that it should spend more money on other things, right? So again, it is the government. I'm going to change the order, make it passive. And that. Other things, off the top of my head, what's another way of saying things? Other areas. If you want to get a better word which is more strongly related to the government, then I could say sectors, perhaps. Now, here's all my paraphrasing done. I really like the word priority or prioritize different parts of speech, because so often you're going to come across essays which talk about one thing being more important than another. So priority, noun, prioritize, verb, that's just a nice way of totally paraphrasing anything to do with importance, right? So while we don't have the word important explicitly given in this statement from the examiner, what it is saying is that other things are more important. I could have used the word important, but that's just a word which in my own vocabulary for IELTS, I like to use often. And hopefully you're going to develop that same data bank or database of vocabulary that you can draw on as well. That's why we're practicing together. So let's go back to the template. So again, P1, P2, P3. What we can see here is we've done the paraphrasing. Now, at any time, if you want further clarification, please send through a message. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep erasing this board. At home here, I don't have my fancy digital whiteboard, but just remember this webinar will be uploaded. So if you want to watch it again, you can on Facebook, YouTube, on the grade site itself. Let's move on to the position. So this is so important. Again, we're told in task response on the band descriptors that we have to have a clear position throughout our essay. Now, this is why I would suggest with agree, disagree essays, and sometimes you're going to have a position where you mostly agree or mostly disagree, but in general, I think it's going to be clearer if you totally agree or totally disagree, right? So this is where, during the exam, once you've done your paraphrasing, if you do want to do your paraphrasing first, think really carefully about your position. There's one question you need to ask yourself. What is the easiest thing for you to write about? Now, when you're considering that question, think about the vocabulary that you can use. So I'm going to put this question back up. So we're told that some people believe the government spends too much money on the arts and it should spend more money on other things. Now, to me, it's easier to agree with this, right? So my position is going to be I totally agree with this. This is the statement where I first give my position, and I don't think I could make it any clearer. I totally agree with this. Here's an example of referencing. This is the statement, what some people think. Now, the reason I've chosen to agree with this statement is because then, and this is where I start doing my brainstorming, I can make a whole list of different points. Now, obviously, I'm a teacher. I think education is more important than the arts. Could be health. All I'm doing right now is I'm just brainstorming some things which I could write about. Infrastructure. Now, I'll give you a chance. Send me a message if you can think of other things. So this is where, if you want to add other things to the list, please feel free to. But I want to move on to looking ahead at the rest of the essay template. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to be all over the place trying to get little bits of, well, these sheets of paper to update the whiteboard. So you're going to see me move off screen a little bit during this webinar. But I just wanted to go ahead and just point out that this would be, let's say I choose two main points. I think education and health are more important than the arts. And I decide not to write about infrastructure. Maybe I feel that I have more vocabulary and it's easier for me to write about these two things. This would be main body paragraph 1. This would be main body paragraph 2. Now, if I follow that structure or close to it for my main body paragraphs for education and health, I'm going to come very close to, or probably exceed, the 250 words which I'm asked to write. So that's just looking ahead at how my position flows through into the rest of the essay. Let's put the question back up again, or the template rather. So I've done my position right here. And this is a nice sentence that you can use to preview your main points, right? So as it says, preview your main points. And I've already told you that I'm going to write about education and health. A nice simple sentence. In particular, health and education are more important. Right, so there's that word important, which pops up in so many exams. I could swap the order. I could use important in my paraphrasing and prioritize down here. But I'm pretty happy with this introduction because I've paraphrased, I've stated a very clear position, and then I've previewed the main points which I'm going to address in my essay. So let's have a look at one main body paragraph for this one here. So, as you can see, I've stated that education and health are more important than the arts. So this would be one main body paragraph, and this would be another. Sorry, let's have a look at health, right? So now, as always, when you're writing, you need to have a plan. Even simple plans for your main body paragraphs. So this is main body 1. If you're not sure what MB is, it means main body. I'll write that up. So here I'm not going to write the whole paragraph in front of you, but I'm going to show you how you can brainstorm very quickly using this template. So this one here is going to be about health. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to ask myself a simple question. Why is health more important than the arts? The first thing that comes to mind is it can be a matter of life and death, right? Unfortunately, we're living in a time of pandemics, right? So and you see how quick this is to do. Just come up with some ideas. So as long as it's on task, as long as you're answering why health is more important than the arts, any of these points, these supporting ideas are going to be fine. Let's leave it at that. So essentially, what I've done here, I'm going to write SI1. This will be supporting idea 1. And this will be supporting idea 2. Now, I might think as I'm writing, I might want to change the order of these. But at this point, this is the main body of my first paragraph. And I'm happy that these are on topic and they're supporting my position, that health and education, but in this paragraph, health is more important than the arts. Why? Because it's a matter of life and death. Then with your evidence, I'd probably give a further explanation, or I could give an example. I think there's an obvious example here with pandemics. Now my example, this just means example if you're not familiar with that, might be COVID-19, right? So here I might just have an explanation. And then I actually recommend writing your topic sentences after you've got all your ideas in place. So with the topic sentence, the main thing is you need one because it shows a clear topic of each paragraph, but it should also link back to your position, so it makes the essay cohesive. So it doesn't really matter how you write it, but I would probably try to draw in the main focus of the essay. So life and death. So health is vital, right? So that's a nice word which talks about life and death, right? So because really pandemics is also related to this as well, right? So I'm not going to go into cohesive devices during this webinar. At this point, I just want to give you some insight as to how I would go through each of these different essay types. So there's just a very quick overview of a main body paragraph. Down the bottom, you can see the conclusion, and I'm going to show you the conclusion for each one, but it's always the same format. You can think of it as having two parts. In the first part, I'm going to paraphrase my position. Then I want to show you a nice complex sentence that you can use. So when I'm paraphrasing my position, remember my position is that I agree that health and education are more important than the arts. Now, so that's what I should be making my conclusion as. So something related to that. You just don't want to be repetitive. So, but I'm always going to begin with this cohesive device. In conclusion, now I'm going to say the government should redirect funds, or I might talk about the budget as another way of saying money which the government uses. Let's just talk. I think a general rule is you try to use the words which you're given in the statement from the examiner once. Let's just go with money here. Should redirect money from the arts to health and education. So this is just a really simple way of writing a conclusion. And again, what I'm trying to get across to you with these templates is, I don't know if you like doing cooking, but it's nice to have a recipe that you know very well, which you can use. So what I'm giving you here is a recipe which you can use, hopefully you can remember and use in your exam, right? So the first part of the recipe for the conclusion is just paraphrase your position. And then your recommendation, I like to do it this way. It's a nice complex sentence using an if clause. If I was, or were, because I remember we had a very keen viewer who asked me about the difference between was or were. Both of them are fine. I just like to use was. If I was, now instead of saying the government, here in New Zealand, we have a Prime Minister. If I was the Prime Minister, what would I do? Now I'm going to avoid using the same kind of sentences again and again, or the same words. I would build, I'm going to reference back to health. All right, so I'll use the blue pen, sorry, just so you can see what I'm doing. What I'm doing essentially with this recommendation, I'm just adding a little bit more detail in, right? So I would build more hospitals. You can probably guess what I'm going to do next for education. Schools. Yes, if I had more than 40 minutes, I may be able to come up with an even better essay, but there's only 40 minutes in that test. That's why I think it's so important to have this template or this recipe, as I called it before, that you can rely upon to have a good answer for any agree, disagree question. So what we're going to do is move on to two views and your opinion. Hopefully, as I've planned, hopefully as we move through the tasks, you'll get more and more used to them, to the templates, and see the similarities, and we'll progress a little faster. But let's move on to two views and your opinion. So I'm going to put the question up for you. So as I said, you're going to see me moving off screen with all these different sheets of paper, just trying to make the most of this whiteboard here at home. But I want to give you a chance to review this question. This is the question that we looked at in webinar 2. So please read through this again. Okay, hopefully you've had enough time to read this question, or in some cases, if you watch this webinar, review this question. Now, the agree, disagree, and two views and your own opinion tasks often get confused. The easiest way to think about it, when we have an agree, disagree task, we're only given one statement by the examiner, and we just have to agree or disagree with that, just as I showed you before. But we can see here, we have two views, right? So we're given a little bit of background, right? So in some countries, tax rates are low and people earn higher salaries, right? So some people believe this is good for a country, but others think that the government should significantly raise taxes and therefore reduce how much people earn. Right, so we have two views. This, I think, is the real key. I'm going to put the template up in a second, but just to look ahead, this one, in this essay, we should have 3 main body paragraphs. Right, so main body paragraph 1 will be view 1. Main body paragraph 2, view 2, main body paragraph 3, your opinion. Now, I know this is a review if you have seen this webinar, but it's always good to review. And this is so important because this is where many students fall down. View 1 is that, we'll just put low tax, low taxes, high salaries. View 2, higher taxes, so higher than these ones, lower salaries. Now, I'm going to talk about your opinion in a second. So what's important is in this essay, when I talk about view 1, I suggest not trying to incorporate your opinion into view 1, and don't try and incorporate your opinion into view 2. In other words, what you're doing is you're going to report, right? So there's a difference between reporting and giving an opinion. Here, I'm going to report why some people think that low taxes and high salaries is a good thing. I'm going to talk about some reasons why some people think this is good. But I'm not going to say it's my opinion. For view 2, I'm going to talk about why other people disagree, why other people think higher taxes and lower salaries are better for a country. Now, I think in order to draw this argument or to draw this debate together, I'm going to talk about how a government does this, and they do it through the use of taxes, right? So that'll be something I'll have to explain, right? So in some countries, the tax rate is lower. So that means from the same salary, the government doesn't take as much tax away from it. So person in this country takes more money home with them. Whereas here, obviously the country has higher tax rates. So the government takes more of their money away. So they take less money home. But I'm only explaining why some people think this is good and why other people think that is good. And it's not until main body 3 that I'm going to give my opinion. And I like to think of this as a spectrum, right? So we have view 1 and view 2. And even though this might not be my own opinion, and it doesn't matter what my opinion is in terms of the IELTS, all that matters is that I have a nice, clear position and I'm using good vocabulary and grammar and all of the other things on the band descriptors. That's what matters. I'm just going to say moderate taxes, moderate salaries. Now, the reason I suggest doing this is because if you examine the band descriptors closely, it talks about repetition. And by setting up my essay this way, I'm avoiding any chance of repetition. Now, my main body paragraph 3, where I talk about my opinion, that won't need as much explaining because the explanation has been done here and here. But I'm just giving my opinion contrast to these two. So I'm not repeating any of the same ideas. So let's move back now to the introduction. So here's the template for this introduction, right? So hopefully you're going to start seeing a trend where there's always the same idea, right? So we've got the 3 P's: paraphrase, preview, and position. But in this case, what's happening here is sometimes we're going to put the preview first and the position at the end. And with the 2 views or opinion, I suggest just making it 1 sentence. So I'm not going to paraphrase that big long explanation we were given by the examiner, but instead I want to show you how to write the green part. So let's imagine I've done all the paraphrasing. I'm only going to do that once in this webinar because we can talk about paraphrasing skills at another time. We can focus on that. But let's look at how these previews and positions change for each of the different essay types. So, and again, the more you can try and memorize of these sentences so that you can pull them out in your test, the better. I will explore both views before arguing that, and my view, what's the word I use? It starts with M, moderation. Key, right? So the best thing, most important thing. So I don't need to talk about the two views, right? Because that's in my paraphrasing. Let me put this up for you again. Right, so when I say I will explore both views, the views are embedded. They're part of the paraphrasing. So I don't need to repeat those views again because I've already paraphrased them. So that's what I mean by the preview, right? So the preview essentially has become part of the paraphrasing. But my position is right here. Right, so again, the preview, I'm just going to say that in my essay, I'm going to talk about both views. So this view and that view, which I've already paraphrased. And then here is my position here, that moderation is the key. So again, in case you didn't catch that, the preview, I will explore both views. So we already know what both views are because I've paraphrased. And then my position, which is different to avoid repetition, is not high tax, not low tax, nice and in the middle, the Goldilocks zone. So I just wanted to use this template. I'll bring it up for you again. So the main focus here with the two views or opinion, I've tried to contrast that and compare it with the agree, disagree, because that's where a lot of students get confused. So let's move on to the next essay type. I'm not going to write up a conclusion for this one because we focused on that last time. Again, I just wanted to show you the difference. The next essay type is advantages, disadvantages. So what I'll do is I'll put the question up for you to review. Okay, so you can see there's different colors. Stuff has already been underlined because if you saw webinar number 3, oops, there we go. If you saw webinar 3, this is the question we looked at webinar 3. So we're reviewing this, and in particular, we're looking at the slight differences with each template, especially the introduction. So just read this to make sure you understand the question. And by the way, ignore this part here. So I'll just underline, this is the question. This is, if you're seeing this for the first time, this is an answer which a candidate has sent through. So here is the question we're given right here. Okay, I'm going to show you the template for the advantages, disadvantage introduction paragraph. Now, again, hopefully you're seeing a trend that every introduction, regardless of the essay type, includes paraphrasing, a position which many students overlook, and a preview of the main points. Now, this is a simple way to do an advantages, disadvantage introduction. And again, especially for advantages, disadvantages essays, I often see that students do not include a position. But just to reiterate, to repeat, and I said this in the webinar, we've actually done 2 advantages, disadvantages essays during the webinars, that you need to have a clear position in any essay throughout the entire essay. So that includes the introduction. I know many students have been taught structures for advantages, disadvantage essays where they tend to report advantages and disadvantages and then build up to a conclusion where they give their position in the conclusion. But if you examine the band descriptors very carefully, it tells us that we need to have a clear position throughout. So I'm not going to paraphrase that statement. Let's move on to the position and preview, but I will put it back up for you. So again, this is what I would paraphrase. But I'm not going to do this because we'll have a different webinar where we focus specifically on paraphrasing. But with the task, we're asked to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of renting a home. Now, one possible mistake which you could make is you might start talking about buying a home. That would be off topic, right? So the easiest way to think about a position for an advantages, disadvantage essay is like this. So I paraphrase. All right, so let's just imagine all of that is my paraphrasing. And then I say this. I believe that now renting a home, this is where I do a little bit of brainstorming before I think of my position. In my opinion, there are more disadvantages of renting a home. So I say the negatives of this, right? So there's that referencing, and this is renting a home. The negatives of this, now this is the key word that I hope you can remember. And if you remembered it from last time, that's great. Outweigh. So obviously what I'm doing is I'm using synonyms for advantages and disadvantages, the positives. That is my position right here. Right, so here is my position very clearly, right from the beginning of my essay in the introduction. I'm telling the examiner that I believe the disadvantages of renting outweigh the advantages. I'm still going to answer the question. So don't be confused. I'm still going to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of renting a home, but I'm going to do it in a way where I'm stating my position throughout, right? So I'm going to discuss essentially why there are more disadvantages than advantages, which again is what we're asked to do. So I'm only using the band descriptors to form these templates. Then what I would do for previewing the main points I would brainstorm. Now, you probably remember me doing this, so I'm going to do this quickly. Let's say that these are advantages and these are disadvantages. Advantages of renting, well, maybe more choice. What's another advantage of renting? Maybe it's faster to move. You know, if you own a home and you sell it, that can be a very long process. Disadvantages, you pay someone else's mortgage. At home, if you want to add any more disadvantages, please feel free. You can't renovate easily. And maybe another one, the rents can increase. So that's the symbol for increase. So here's the brainstorming I would do. Right, I'm going to erase this now, and I want to show you. I'm going to get rid of my position. What I'm going to show you, I'll use green because we've got green here. So here are the advantages. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm just changing the order, right? This is one order which I've given you, but I'm going to change it. So I'm going to say while. This is a complex sentence, which is why I've chosen it for you. While renters, we can say tenants is a nice way of. Now, to make it look like this might not always be true, and moving could be easier. Hopefully you can see that. Right, so the reason I'm using these words like may and could is because they support, or they help support my position. So remember, my position is that there are more disadvantages to renting. So if I say, well, there might be more choice, or there may be more choice, or it could be easier to move, it supports my position. And here I'm gonna word the disadvantages more strongly. So while tenants may have more choice and moving could be easier, renting means you pay someone else's mortgage and I'm just going to leave that there because I'm sure you can guess what I would do is I would just work those main points of my preview into this one sentence, right? So always think you're just going to paraphrase and then you're going to have a position and a preview in every introduction. And that sets up the rest of your essay, makes it cohesive. And what it does is before I start going into my main body paragraphs, I've already done my planning. I know what I'm going to write about. So as I mentioned at the start, with the problem solution example, I'm actually going to use the same one which I've used in one of the videos which I've made for grade. So a nice bit of review there as well. Let me put that one up on the board for you. If you could see the rest of my living room, I have paper everywhere at the moment, right? So, but at home, if you can just review this problem solution question. Now, at home, perhaps some viewers might be wondering, oh, what is global warming? Now, I know this is a difficulty in IELTS, is that occasionally you might come across some concepts in the questions which you're not sure about. In that case, you just have to make your best guess. And that's another reason why we do the paraphrasing. Another reason why we paraphrase is because we show the examiner what we think the meaning is, so that if we are wrong or the meaning is not exact, at least the examiner can see the logic in the rest of your essay. So global warming, climate change is one of the biggest threats humans face in the 21st century, and sea levels are continuing to rise at alarming rates. Now, this is something I want to point out immediately. Because this is quite confusing. What problems are associated with this? Now, in the statement, we're actually giving two things, but the last thing that the examiner tells us about are sea levels, right? So that's the main focus, and you will get this sometimes where the main problem, in this case, rising sea levels, is put against some background. Right, so obviously global warming causes rising sea levels, but to make it easier, in this case, I would just focus on the problem of rising sea levels. If you wanted to include global warming, it's just going to make a 250-word essay too big. So this I would define as the rising sea levels, right? So I want to show you the template for problem solution essays. Now you'll see again some green, right? So again, let's imagine we've paraphrased everything, but then this is actually very similar to the two views in your own opinion essay, where we're going to do the preview first. So I want to write this one out for you. And this is one which I've done in one of the videos for the GRAID site. So you might have already seen this. But let's imagine I have my paraphrasing done. All right, so there's the first P. Then I'm just copying this blue sentence, and if you're unsure what P1 and P2 means, S1 and S2, well, this means problem 1 and problem 2, and solution 1 and solution 2. The reason I'm going to talk about two solutions is because we're asked to. So the question is, what problems are associated with this, which is rising sea levels, and what are some possible solutions, right? So we need to do more than one solution. We need to talk about more than one. So I will explore. So, yeah. So this is a slight deviation from the essay, but it doesn't matter because I think this one might actually be easier for you to remember. I will explore the issues. Now, I'm not going to use the word associated because that's in the question that we're given. I'll show you that again. So in this case, the examiner has used the word associated. So I'm going to use a synonym for that to use a wider range of vocabulary. But in other cases, the green sentence that I've given you will be applicable. But I'm just making a slight change. So in this case, I'm not going to use the word associated. I'm going to say related. Right, so there's a synonym for associated. Now, P1, P2, I'm going to name two problems that are associated with rising sea levels. And the way that I do that is I use this word namely, right, which is a really nice one because it's easy to use in a sentence. And maybe you can think of a couple of problems associated with rising sea levels. If flooding is one of those problems, well done. What's another problem associated with rising sea levels? Right, so climate refugees. This means if people's homelands get flooded and they lose the ability to grow food, or they just can't live there anymore, those people are going to have to go elsewhere. So there's a couple of problems associated with rising sea levels. And then I just continue on before. Now I'm using the word arguing because this highlights or this signals my position. And essentially in a problem solution essay, think about it this way: your position are what you think the solutions are. Before arguing this, again, this is rising sea levels. Can be solved. So a different part of speech from solution. And here, I'm just going to think of two solutions. Can you think of two solutions for rising sea levels? So this is a slight deviation from the example I've given in the video, but I just wanted to show you this particular sentence, which I think might be easier for you to memorize. By building seawalls, and one more solution. Relocation plans, right? So in other words, the seawalls relates to flooding and the relocation plans relates to, so I'll underline it in blue so you can see where I'm going. So building seawalls relates to flooding, right? And in red, relocation plans relate to the climate refugees. So hopefully that makes sense. You're probably thinking at home, oh, this is a hard essay. I'll bring it back up for you. I agree, this is a more challenging essay than the other three that we've been through today. But that is the luck of the test, unfortunately. Sometimes you might get a topic that you're more familiar with, others that you're less familiar with. But if you have these recipes or these templates that you can rely upon, so you know the structure of how you're going to word your essay, I think that's going to go a long way to helping you to achieve your goals. Let's move on to the last one. And the good news is that I think in general, 2 questions are among the easier types of essays. So I'm going to put that question up for you again. So this was the question that we did in webinar number 5. I'll hang it up for you. I'll add this sheet to the huge collection of paper I have. So this is the entire question here. Obviously some in from previous webinars, but please just review this question and I'll erase this. Okay, hopefully you've had enough time to review or read this question for the first time, perhaps. Again, I'll use red this time. This is the statement that we have been given by the examiner. This is what we're going to paraphrase. Now, the reason why I think that two questions are perhaps easier, depending if you're familiar with the topic, but perhaps two question essays are easier than others, is because it's quite explicit. It's the examiner's telling you exactly what you want, what you have to write about, right? So first part of your essay is going to be how important are early reading skills in a child's academic performance. So you need to think what's the easiest way to answer that question. If I were you, or if I was you, I would just say they're very important, because then that's going to tie in well with the next question, which are, what other preschool factors influence a child's later academic achievements? So I want to show you the template and how this fits in with the template for two questions. So again, I'm not going to paraphrase that statement. We'll look at paraphrasing in some future webinars, but let's assume that I've done my paraphrasing. A nice way to think about two questions is that your position is answering the first question almost always, right? So my position, reading skills are very important. So I'll bring that back up for you. So how important are early reading skills in a child's academic performance? Essentially, this is going to be my position here. So I'm just going to write position. Right, so that first question relates to the position. So I'm going to say something like, I believe that. Right, so this is the start of my position. And again, I'm making it really clear to the examiner that I'm using a complex sentence with a verb of saying or thinking. I believe that. Now, another way of saying this, early reading skills, learning to read. Early reading skills, what about learning to read at an early age? How important is vital? For a child's academic performance, well, essentially, what we're talking about here is education. Right, so there is my position. And then, whoops. That's not what I want to show you. Okay, what I'll do is I'll just go straight ahead. And what I'm going to say is that this here, all I wanted to show you, to be honest, I've lost that bit of paper amongst all the other paper, that this essentially is your preview right here. Right, so the main points relate to the second question. So what other preschool factors influence the child's later academic performance? Now, while I'm saying that learning to read at an early age is vital or very important, in other words, I might also say, however, and these two main points could be in one paragraph or two main body paragraphs, depending on how many ideas you have. Personally, I'd probably look at this as one main body paragraph and then a paragraph each for these two main points. I'll say social skills. Instead of saying learning, I might say developing. That's not going to fit. I'll say mathematics. Instead of saying skills, then I'll say knowledge. I'll also now in here they've used, the examiner has given us the word important. I can also say a nice way of paraphrasing this is significant. Right, so looking ahead, just to wrap up this webinar by moving back to the template for the main body paragraph, what I would have here, as I mentioned before, I'm going to have three of these paragraphs. The first paragraph will be here, right? So in other words, learning to read at an early age, right? So that will be main body 1. Developing social skills will be main body 2. And then basic mathematical knowledge will be main body 3, right? So how many paragraphs do you need to have in an IELTS writing task 2 essay? Well, it really depends on the task. And in this case, I would go for 3, which means that perhaps this essay might be longer than some other ones that I write, but you're going to get that. Sometimes you're going to have slightly longer essays. Sometimes you might be exactly or very close to that 250 word count that you're given by the examiner. But every time I just wrap up my conclusion the same way, right? So that 2-part conclusion, paraphrase the position, then give a recommendation. Now, in this case, I'm not going to imagine I'm the government. I actually do have a child, but the examiner doesn't know that. So I could still say something like, if I was a parent, I would teach my child to read, give him or her, teach my child to read and study maths, as well as giving him or her plenty of chances to meet and socialize with other children. So in other words, just if I was a parent, what would I do? And those things that I would do as a parent, they're just summarizing all of the different parts of my main body. So nice way to think about English writing. I'll put this up. It's a hamburger approach. Maybe some of you have seen this before, but you're going to get an insight into how bad I am at art. So this is a hamburger, apparently. Some sesame seeds. So introduction. We'll just say intro, main bodies, and conclusion. An easy way to think about an essay: in the introduction, I will tell you. In the main bodies, I am telling you. In the conclusion, I told you. Now, that'll, if you think really simply like that, that'll make sure that you stay on topic and that everything is cohesive and coherent. So I really hope that me introducing these templates to you is going to help you with writing task 2. We're going to leave writing task 2 here for now. And on Tuesday, we're going to move on to, I'll bring it up, or I'll write it up for you. So I'll show you the schedule, or the schedule, depending if you like American or British English. So today is Sunday, obviously. We're also having webinars on Tuesdays and Thursdays. At this stage, we're sticking with 1:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time, which here in New Zealand is 8 p.m. But for the next 3 webinars, so the Tuesday webinar, the Thursday webinar, and then back to Sunday, we're going to have a grammar focus. Now, the first focus I'm going to have will be complex sentences. So that'll be the Tuesday webinar. So 24 hours before the webinar starts, at 1:30 Indian Standard Time, there will be a worksheet uploaded onto Facebook. Now, it doesn't matter if you don't have time to complete the worksheet, but if you want to practice before we do the worksheet together, I think that would be helpful. But basically, with the grammar focus, we're going to have a worksheet and examine in more detail complex sentences. Because again, there's something which I mentioned on the band descriptors, or in the band descriptors, and I just thought it would be a good time to start drawing together some of those micro skills into the big skills such as writing. So I hope that helped. Don't be afraid to ask any further questions. If you want to watch the replay, if you're not sure, always feel free to ask some questions on Facebook or on the GRAID website. Okay, take care and stay safe.